Funding provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting through the Pacific Mountain Network Program Fund.
Southeast Alaska. Extending over 500 miles north from the Canadian border is home to 70,000 people. These protected waters, known as the Inside Passage, have become widely popular vacation destinations. Visitors come for the spectacular scenery and to see one of the richest, most diverse and unspoiled wildlife habitats in the world. The Alexander Archipelago is defined by over 11,000 miles of shoreline. The land itself comprises the nation's largest national forest, the Tongass. Glaciers, still receding from the last ice age, have left behind an abundance of fjords and straits dotted with 1,000 forested islands. But the dominant feature here is water, and it's these cold Pacific waters that provide the food-rich habitat for the largest residents, the whales of Alaska's Inside Passage. Whales are now appreciated by humans for the magnificent and intelligent creatures that they are. But that was not always the case. A century ago, while thousands of fortune seekers made their way north to Alaska's gold fields, still others came in ships, hunting whales for their oil and baleen. Shore-based whaling stations were established in southeast Alaska on Killisnoo Island, at Murder Cove on Admiralty Island, and at Port Armstrong on Baranof Island. Populations of many whale species were reduced by 90% or more until commercial hunting in the North Pacific finally ceased in the 1970s. Today, the protected waters of the Inside Passage are an essential habitat for whales, dolphins, and porpoises because of the abundant food supply. In summer months, the baleen whales, including the minke and humpback, sift out up to 1 ton of krill and small schooling fish per day, equivalent to about 1 million calories. These giant animals must eat enough food to build an energy reserve for their winter migrations to and from tropical mating and calving grounds where they will fast. The toothed whales of southeast Alaska range from the elusive harbor porpoise at around 5 feet to the killer whale, with adult males reaching up to 32 feet in length. Somewhat larger than the harbor porpoise, the Dall's porpoise is an avid bow rider and a very fast swimmer. Their trademark rooster tail is often heard before they are seen. With the whaling stations long gone, Alaska's Inside Passage has been transformed from a killing field to a giant laboratory for some of the most fascinating whale research in the world. Wildlife biologist Christine Gabriel spends much of her time on the water hunting for humpbacks, armed not with a harpoon, but with a 35mm camera, gathering population data on this endangered species.
We identify humpbacks by the markings on the underside of their tail. So when a whale dives, the underside has a black and white pattern, sometimes all black, sometimes all white, and anywhere in between. And also a distinctive edge shape that allows us to identify individuals. Long-term studies of individuals allow us to assemble whole life histories of whales. In Glacier Bay, we have individual histories that go back as many as 22 years. And from that, we can determine the return of calves to the areas where their mothers took them in their first year of life and where they feed. Also, from a long-term study, you can get individual reproductive rates and look at the variability in female reproductive rates.
Recent research indicates that humpback whales may live 60 years or more, about twice what was previously thought. Females may produce more than a dozen offspring during their lifetime, usually one every other year. Despite a seemingly high reproductive rate, little is known about calf survival. This may be due to the fact that mothers, who are very protective of their young, often separate from larger groups, taking their calves to more remote areas.
There's Gertrude, 573. Don't know that one. During any photo ID observation that we make of whales, we also observe their behavior and just a general idea of what they're doing. The other data that I collect out in the field is the depth of the water and the surface temperature. Those are routinely, as well as the latitude and longitude. And so we can look at their distribution and also look at types of habitat they're using. The depth sounder shows at what depth the prey that they're probably feeding on is, so we can get an idea of maybe how deep they're diving and hopefully what they're actually eating.
Humpback whales employ a variety of unique feeding strategies, including coordinated group feeding, where anywhere from 2 to 20 whales will herd schools of fish into dense food masses. The whales then lunge upward through these food masses to surface with their mouths wide open. Like all whales, humpbacks spend most of their time immersed in their undersea world. But it's their theatrical surface behavior, like lunge feeding and breaching, that makes watching whales in southeast Alaska so popular with visitors and locals alike.
Wow! Big tail coming up. Wow! Wow! All right.
For Chris Gabriel, who's been working with humpbacks for 10 years, every day spent with these 45-foot, 40-ton gentle giants is thrilling.
I'm studying a population that's relatively small. Each year in this area there are from 40 to about 70 whales. So a lot of the time when I go out on the water and observe a whale, I actually recognize it. I think that's whale 1067, who's about 4 years old. It's really an amazing thing to be able to observe the animal in the context of knowing, how old it is and who its kin are and what sex it is.
Field surveys are only a small part of humpback whale research. In Sitka, biologist Jan Straley enlists the help of students from the University of Alaska Southeast and Mount Edgecombe High School to update the sighting histories of individual animals. They begin by comparing recent photographs to a database of known humpbacks dating back to 1979.
Yeah, they matched it. Yeah, this is an interesting whale because this is a 1994 photograph, and that's a 1988 photograph when the whale was a calf. And so look how much it's changed. It's still the same whale, but it's, when you put it like that, it's added these dark dots. It's gotten rid of this white here. And so this whale now is 6 years, in 1994, was 6 years old. Good work. Seventh photo. Out of how many, Andrew?
11.
11? Okay. We want to match
The
yours.
students also participate in field surveys, collecting data on humpbacks in Sitka Sound, where large groups of whales appear in the late fall before making their 3,000-mile journey to mating and calving grounds in Hawaii. These shore-based surveys differ from boat surveys because the students don't identify individuals, but monitor activity in one specific area over a long period of time.
We'll record the date and the time we're here, the weather conditions, you know, rainy, snow, windy, sea conditions. Obviously, if there's whales out there, we count them and we record elapsed dive times. Last year, it looked as if the most whales that were seen were in the last week of December. They saw as many as 23 whales out here in one day, but it ranges. It could be 0 to 23.
Long-term studies by researchers like Chris Gabriel and Jan Straley have contributed much to what we know about humpback whales.
The most significant thing has come out of this research is that whales can stay in Alaskan waters for up to 9 months. They're seen in all months of the year here. When I first started this research, I thought I had found an overwintering population. However, since then, I have found they can stay for up to 9 months and migrate to Hawaii very fast. We have tracked a whale that left Sitka Sound in January and arrived in the Big Island 39 days later. A month to get there, that's pretty quick.
It's in Hawaii, during the winter mating and calving season, that male humpbacks perform their eerie vocalizations, thought to be acoustic advertisements for mating services. Lasting up to 15 minutes, these mysterious songs have come to symbolize the voice of all whales, even in space aboard Voyager as it explores the galaxy carrying recorded messages from Earth. Another, not quite so large but equally fascinating resident of the Inside Passage is the killer whale. Unlike the humpback, the killer whale, or orca, is a top predator that travels and hunts in family groups called pods. Killer whales are actually the largest members of the dolphin family. Marilyn Dahlheim of the National Marine Mammal Lab in Seattle has been studying killer whales in Alaska since 1969.
We've got two major, or two large resident groups here in Southeast Alaska. They're termed AF pod and AG pod. The A is basically for Alaska. AF pod contains 40-some animals. AG pod contains about 25, 26 animals. Out of 250 animals, about 150 are resident animals to this area, and the rest are transients. The transients we've seen all the way down to the Strait of Juan de Fuca and in the state of Washington. And a few years back, we actually had some animals ID'd between Glacier Bay and Central California.
As with humpback whales, it's photo identification that provides a baseline for studying behaviors, genetic relationships, and reproductive characteristics in and among the different pods. Dina Matkin monitors Southeast Alaska killer whale populations with year-round surveys in the Glacier Bay area.
Over the last 10 years, we've been trying to photo-identify all the killer whale individuals that come into this area by taking black and white photographs of the unique markings on their dorsal fin and saddle patches. And in this way, we can make minimum population estimates of how many individuals use this area.
The technique for photo-identifying and cataloging individual killer whales was developed in 1973 by the late Dr. Michael Bigg. This pivotal breakthrough made it possible for Bigg and those who followed in his footsteps to finally study killer whales in the wild.
By documenting individuals year after year that come into this area, We can determine birth rates of the new calves being brought into the pods, death rates. Sometimes if we don't see an individual for several years, it's sometimes assumed that they have died, depending on which group they're from.
Resident pods, a term better suited to their social nature rather than their geographic movement, represent very cohesive family groups. Aside from associating with other pods for breeding, these families will basically remain together for life.
I think that's why people identify with them so much, because in a lot of ways, they're at the same place we are on the food chain, right at the top. There's nothing else that really gets them besides people occasionally, either through live capturing or that type of thing. They come into puberty about the same time people do. The females have maybe 4 or 5 calves their whole life, so they don't breed every year. They don't have that high of a reproductive rate. And then the females go into menopause. Basically, they stop breeding at about the same time we do. And now it's thought that the females may live 80+ years. The strongest bond is between a mother and her calves. And so it's now thought that a pod is made up of females, grandmothers, mothers, and daughters. The adult males in these family groups are very likely the sons of these adult females. And so the males will go off into other groups in order to breed, but basically travel and feed with their maternal family group.
This new understanding has clearly changed our relationship with the killer whale, an animal once considered a dangerous man-eater with all the personality of a great white shark.
There's never been a documented case of a killer whale ever consuming a human. Once in a while, they have rammed boats because the people on the boats have been shooting at them. And even that is very rare. They don't look at us as a species to do battle with. Sometimes they're just curious about us, though. They'll come up and take a look for themselves. Particularly the juveniles or the little calves can be very curious.
The Tlingit natives of southeast Alaska, on the other hand, have always held the belief that killer whales would never harm humans, but would instead aid them with gifts of strength and food from the sea. The Tlingit people maintain a spiritual relationship with the killer whale, who still plays a vital role in many traditional ceremonies. Like their dolphin relatives, killer whales rely heavily on sound for navigation and for communicating with members of their pod. Clicks and popping sounds are used for echolocation, working like sonar to provide them with an acoustical image of their surroundings. Even more interesting to researchers are the distinct squeals and whistles that killer whales use to communicate with each other.
There's unique acoustical differences between residents and transients, and there's acoustical differences between and amongst all the different pods, and they've been coined as dialects. So each individual pod has its own unique acoustical repertoire. Like if you're 10 miles away and you hear your pod calling, you know that's your pod.
While the fish-eating resident pods, who spend much of their time following southeast Alaska's salmon, are very closely knit family groups, the transients are the vagabonds of the species. Considered an entirely different race of killer whales, transients have a more fluid social structure and will travel thousands of miles in search of their prey, which consists of seals, sea lions, porpoises, and sometimes seabirds or even larger whales. Although their range makes them much more difficult to study, at least one individual has caught the eye of Dina Matkin.
T2 is an adult male killer whale who is quite unique. When he was first photo identified in British Columbia, that was 20 years ago, he had a large straight dorsal fin, and as the years have gone by, the very tip of his dorsal curls over very tightly to the left. And so even from a distance, a lot of people have seen and recognized T2. But every year, new things happen. He gives me new insight into his life and his associations. Last year, he came in with 21 of his buddies. He came into Glacier Bay in June, and that was the largest group I'd ever seen him with.
Today, Alaska's whales are safe from the harpoons and factory ships, but now face new threats. Researchers are just beginning to study how interaction with fisheries and increased vessel traffic from cruise ships to kayaks are affecting the whales who depend on this area as their primary or even sole source of food. Ironically, some of the same whales that narrowly escaped the harpoons not so long ago are now in danger of being loved to death. Realizing the importance of preserving this critical marine mammal habitat, Glacier Bay National Park has adopted a new vessel management plan to balance the needs of marine mammals with increasing visitor traffic.
One of the things that the vessel management plan does is provide for the potential for additional increases in the future, but those are tied to and contingent upon completion of several studies, which have been needed in the park for quite a number of years. And again, what they'll do is look at some of these fundamental questions that, have been ongoing issues at Glacier Bay that relate to, whether or not vessels are having an adverse impact on whales or other marine mammals, other wildlife.
While all marine mammals are protected from harassment by federal law, there are additional guidelines that should be followed when watching whales.
I think tourists and boaters and fishermen in general should treat whales with caution and understand that they are an animal that is very sensitive to underwater noise and any type of a disturbance of their habitat. Some whales, particularly mothers and calves, are very sensitive to boaters and vessel disturbance.
After 20 years of research, we still don't know much about whales. They spend their lives in an environment that remains alien and mysterious to us. What we have learned is that Southeast Alaska is a habitat that is critical to the survival of these animals, but also one that is very fragile.
Another reason why Southeastern Alaska is a very special and unique place at this point in time is because it's still relatively clean. We haven't had any huge oil spills such as what has happened in Prince William Sound. They lost 14 individuals out of the most cohesive, best studied pod. That was all within a few years of the Exxon Valdez oil spill.
Humpbacks are still classified as an endangered species. We don't have enough information on the North Pacific population. We don't know whether it's recovering or not. When you think about when whaling stopped in the North Pacific, really in the early 70s, it was really much later than when whaling stopped in the North Atlantic, so that may be one reason that the recovery is slower.
Whether you are a marine mammal researcher or seeing whales up close for the first time, you can't help but appreciate being in the presence of one of nature's great wonders.
But it makes me feel very, very small. It really gives you a perspective of where humans are in this entire world when you are up close to an animal that's 40 tons and bigger than a bus.
knowing that they are unique individuals, knowing that they have families just like I have a family, certainly makes me identify with them and want to be a spokesperson for them. They're beings that have been around a long, long time and that may be able to teach lessons to us about ourselves.
As the research continues, we'll certainly learn more about the whales of Alaska's Inside Passage and hopefully find ways for man and whale, who've long shared a mutual fascination with one another, to coexist, not just in Alaska, but in all the oceans of the world.
Funding provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting through the Pacific Mountain Network Program Fund.